He's stealing our fish. Armed intruder, take him down. I was face down, in the mud before I could process what was happening. December cold, seeping through my flannel shirt. My cheek pressed into half-frozen dirt that tasted like motor oil and humiliation. Metal cuffs bit into my wrists while 3 patrol cars sat with engines running. Exhaust mixing with morning fog rolling across my private lake. "This is my land," I shouted, into the mud. Breath coming in. Angry bursts. "I own this lake." 20 years. He's lying. Diane Sullivan's voice cut through the December morning like broken glass. "That's HOA property. He comes here every morning to steal from us." A deputy's knee pressed harder into my back. Through the corner of my eye, I could see Diane standing over me. Phone out and recording. Her face twisted with righteous fury as she documented what she believed was the arrest of a criminal. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see through her arrogance, was that she'd just walked into a trap that would cost her everything she'd spent years building. That 911 call was about to become the most expensive phone call of her life. $1.2 million expensive. But to understand how I ended up tasting December dirt on land I'd owned for 2 decades, land my grandfather had left me in his will, you need to rewind exactly 10 minutes to the silence before the storm. My ranch sits in a valley that catches morning fog like a bowl catching steam. A place where the only noise at 4:30 in the morning is usually the rhythmic click of my spinning reel and the distant call of a heron hunting the shallows. I'm Marcus Clayton, 45 years old. Civil engineer by trade. Divorced father of 1 who'd learned over the years that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was sovereignty over your own space, in a world that increasingly demanded you answer to everyone about everything. I'd been standing on my dock since dawn broke through the December cold, sipping black coffee from a thermos, watching the mist burn off the water while I worked a crankbait along the drop-off near the old willow stump where the big bass always held. This was my ritual, my meditation, my sanctuary, the one place on earth where I didn't have to explain myself to a soul, where my skin color didn't matter, where I was just a man with a fishing rod doing what men have done since the beginning of time. That peace shattered not with a polite knock or a neighborly hello, but with a tactical invasion that would have been excessive for a bank robbery. The arrival of the police was a disorienting kaleidoscope of panic, a wall of noise and flashing lights as 3 county cruisers skidded to a halt on my gravel access road, sending December frost flying into the morning air. I watched in disbelief as uniformed officers poured out, hands hovering over holsters, shouting commands that made absolutely no sense for what should have been a simple fishing dispute. "Show me your hands. Drop the weapon." One deputy was screaming, referring to the graphite fishing rod, in my hand like it was an assault rifle, his voice cracking with adrenaline and fear. It was surreal, a nightmare sequence imposed on reality, but it made perfect sense. The moment I saw Diane marching behind the police line through the winter morning, pointing at me with theatrical urgency, she'd clearly told the dispatcher something far worse than neighbor fishing complaint, likely claiming I was an armed intruder or worse to get this level of aggressive response from law enforcement. I'm a black man in rural America. I've been one my entire life. I know exactly how these situations can end if you make the wrong move, say the wrong thing, or even breathe in a way that gets misinterpreted as threatening. So I didn't run. I didn't fight. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I slowly, deliberately placed the fishing rod on the wooden planks of the dock and raised my hands high, palms open and facing forward, signaling total compliance to the adrenaline-fueled deputies who were treating me like I was public enemy number one. But compliance wasn't enough. It's never enough. When someone has already painted you as the villain, two of them rushed the dock, boots thundering on the hollow wood, and before I could speak a single word in my own defense, I was spun around violently and forced off the dock onto the muddy bank below. The impact knocked the wind out of me, driving the cold, wet soil into my cheek, and I felt a heavy knee drive into the small of my back with unnecessary force that sent pain radiating through my spine. The metal cuffs ratcheted shut around my wrists, each click sending sharp electric shocks of pain up my shoulders while my face pressed deeper into the December mud. "I told you," Diane was screaming, her voice cracking with hysteria as she loomed over me like a conquering general. "I told you, he comes here every morning to steal our fish. That lake belongs to the community. Look at him finally, caught like a rat." She was filming the entire scene with her phone, holding it horizontally to get the best cinematic angle for whatever neighborhood group chat she ruled with. An iron fist, narrating my humiliation for her audience. I could see neighbors from the subdivision lining up along the ridge through the morning fog, peering over their privacy fences like spectators at a public execution, whispering and pointing at the criminal who lived in the valley below them. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical pain radiating through my back and shoulders. But I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stay calm, knowing that the history of this dirt, the documented, surveyed, legally recorded history was on my side, not hers. Sheriff Harris finally made his way down the slope, moving with the heavy, tired gait of a man who was too old for sunrise raids on innocent citizens and had probably been roused from his morning coffee for this supposed emergency. I recognized him from town, a decent man, usually someone I'd exchanged pleasantries with at the hardware store, but he was clearly misled by a frantic and wildly exaggerated emergency report. He looked down at me with an expression that mixed stern duty with mild confusion, probably wondering why a supposedly dangerous armed suspect was dressed in flannel and muddy fishing boots rather than tactical gear. He signaled for the young deputy to pull me up to a kneeling position, though he didn't order the cuffs removed, and I could feel mud dripping down my face as I looked up at him. "You're trespassing on private HOA property and poaching wildlife," Harris stated firmly, reciting charges that Diane had likely fed him verbatim over the phone. "Ems, Sullivan here says she's warned you multiple times about this, and that she felt threatened by your presence." I spat a piece of grit out of my mouth and looked him dead in the eye, my pulse hammering in my ears, but my voice deadly calm, despite the rage building inside me. "Sheriff," I said, my voice low and raspy from the pressure that had been on my back. "I'm going to ask you to do one thing before you drag me into that car. And I want you to do it on camera, so Diane gets a good shot of it for her collection." Harris frowned, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "I'm not in the mood for games." "So? You're in serious trouble here." I shook my head slowly. "No games. Sheriff, no tricks." In my back left pocket, there's a heavy-duty Ziploc bag. I want you to open it and read the document inside. If you still want to arrest me after you read what's in there, I will walk into that cruiser myself, without another word. You have my word on that. The sheriff hesitated, glancing at Diane, who was now demanding loudly that they seize my getaway vehicle and search it for stolen fish, before sighing heavily and fishing the waterproof bag out of my back pocket. The sound of the plastic seal opening seemed louder than the sirens had been, cutting through the December morning air with finality. Sheriff Harris unfolded the thick, slightly yellowed document with care. It was a certified, notarized copy of the 1980 Federal Land Survey, stamped with the official red seal of the United States Department of the Interior, complete with raised embossing that couldn't be faked. I watched his eyes scan the paper, his pupils visibly dilating as he read the legal coordinates and traced the thick black boundary line with his finger, following it as it demarcated the original ranch boundaries established by the federal government decades ago. The line encompassed the entire lake, the dock where I'd been standing, the immediate shoreline, and extended 20 feet up the hill, right past the spot where Diane was currently standing in her expensive designer boots. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I could see it happen in real time, the color draining from his weathered face, replaced by the pale, sick look of a lawman who suddenly realizes he's just violated the civil rights of an innocent man based on false information. The silence that descended on the lake was absolute, broken only by the sound of Sheriff Harris clearing his throat and the gentle lap of water against the dock pilings. He slowly folded the survey map, his hands shaking slightly with what I recognized as suppressed anger, not at me, but at the situation he'd been manipulated into creating. "Get those cuffs off him," he barked at the deputy, his voice cracking with sudden intensity that made the younger man jump. "Now, right now. Do it." The deputy looked confused, glancing between the sheriff and Diane with obvious uncertainty about what had just shifted so dramatically. But he scrambled for his keys with fumbling fingers. Diane, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere like a predator sensing danger, stopped recording for the first time and stepped forward, her face twisting from triumph into a mask of indignation. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice going up an entire octave. "He's a criminal. He's been stealing our assets. You work for us. Of the taxpayers we fund your department." Sheriff Harris ignored her completely, stepping forward to help me stand as the cuffs finally clicked open and blood rushed painfully back into my hands. "MS. Sullivan," Harris said, turning to face her, his voice now projecting loud enough for every single gawking neighbor on the ridge to hear clearly through the December morning. According to this federal survey, which supersedes any local HOA bylaws or claims, you are currently standing approximately 20 feet inside this man's private property. The lake you're claiming as community property is not common ground. It's not HOA land. It's his. It belongs to Marcus Clayton, and it has for decades. He pointed a thick finger at the ground near her expensive heels for emphasis. "We just assaulted an innocent man in his own backyard on his own property that he legally owns because of your false report regarding an armed and dangerous individual. You told my dispatcher he had a weapon and was threatening people. That was a lie." He thrust the survey map toward her, holding it close enough for her to see the undeniable truth inked in black and white, stamped with federal authority that no HOA bylaw could override. Diane stared at the map, her eyes widening as she actually processed what she was seeing. her carefully constructed narrative of community rights and property protection fracturing for just a split second before she recovered. She swatted the air near the paper dismissively, refusing to actually touch it as if that would make it less real, and leaned in close to me, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss that only the three of us could hear. "You think this is over?" She spat, her eyes locking onto mine with a hatred so pure it felt cold, even in the December air. "You think that piece of trash paper beats me. I don't care what that map says or what stamp is on it. I have lawyers, real lawyers, who eat people like you for breakfast. They destroy people for a living." She straightened up, smoothing her jacket to regain her composure for her audience watching from the hill. She pointed a manicured finger directly in my face, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the smell of fear sweat. "I will have this lake. I will have this land. One way or another. It will belong to the community. And I will personally make sure you lose everything by next week. Your house, your truck, your reputation, everything. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sleep was an impossibility that night, a concept that belonged to people who hadn't been pinned face down into the mud by law enforcement on their own property. After the sheriff and his convoy of cruisers had departed, leaving only tire tracks gouged into my gravel and an oppressive silence in their wake, I didn't go back to fishing. The morning was ruined, the peace destroyed. Nor did I return to bed to try to salvage what remained of the day. Instead, I retreated into my study, a small room at the back of the house that smelled of old paper and wood smoke from the fireplace. And I turned on my computer with a singular cold purpose that had replaced the hot adrenaline of the arrest. My hands were still throbbing with phantom pains from the handcuffs, a dull ache that served as a metronome for my anger, keeping me focused and sharp as the rest of the world slept through the December night. I needed to understand the architecture of Diane Sullivan's audacity, to map out exactly what I was dealing with. Because people don't call the police on a landowner who's holding a federal survey map unless they're either clinically insane or desperately trying to hide a catastrophic secret that threatens everything they've built. I brewed a second pot of coffee, black and thick, and began digging into the digital footprint of Ridgeview Estates. The internet never forgets. I spent 3 hours scouring county archives and cached pages of the developer's original website, bypassing current newsletters to drill into foundational documents filed 5 years ago when the subdivision broke ground. I pulled up plat maps, zoning variances, and sales history for every lot on the ridge. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, my eyes burning from the blue light of the monitor and my third cup of coffee going cold beside me, I found it buried deep in a subfolder of a defunct realty marketing server that had been taken down years ago but still existed in the Internet Archive. There was a PDF file, glossy and high definition even on my screen, titled Phase 1 Sales, Prospectus and Community Amenities. My stomach tightened as I opened the file, knowing instinctively that I was about to find exactly what I'd been looking for. And there it was, staring back at me on page 4, in bold. Beautiful graphic design. The smoking gun that explained every ounce of Diane's hysteria and desperation on the dock that morning. It was a professionally shot photograph of my lake, clearly taken from the ridge at sunset, with a golden filter applied to make the water look ethereal and inviting, like something out of a luxury resort brochure. superimposed over this image of my private property in bold, elegant letters that couldn't be missed were the words lifetime lake access and exclusive fishing rights for all residents. My stomach turned over with a mixture of nausea and vindication as I scrolled down through the December darkness to read the fine print that Diane had undoubtedly approved personally. The brochure explicitly promised that the Homeowners Association maintained ownership and management of the community wetland and recreation area, guaranteeing stocked waters teeming with bass and catfish, boat launches for resident use, and private picnic grounds for family gatherings. It was a complete and utter fabrication. A fantasy world sold to 50 families who were looking for their slice of the American dream, who'd saved up their money and believed they were buying into something special. I pulled up a new spreadsheet and began to do the math, cross-referencing the sales data I'd pulled earlier with comparable non-lakefront homes in the neighboring zip codes to establish a baseline market value. The numbers that emerged painted a picture of fraud so massive it was actually breathtaking in its simplicity and audacity. Each of the 50 homes in the subdivision had sold for a premium of roughly $30,000 above the standard market rate for similar homes without water access. A premium that was justified entirely and exclusively by the lakefront lifestyle marketing package. I tapped the calculator keys slowly, the sound loud in the quiet room, confirming what I already knew. 50 homes times $30,000 per home equaled exactly $1.5 million. That was the value of Diane's lie. That was the amount of money that had been extracted from unsuspecting buyers based on the ownership of land that neither she nor the Hall held any legal title to. Suddenly, Diane's actions that morning shifted from the petty tyranny of a bored housewife playing HOA dictator to the terrified defensive maneuvers of a felon in waiting who saw her entire scheme about to collapse. She wasn't trying to stop me from fishing because she was a control freak who hated seeing someone enjoy themselves on her lake. She was trying to stop me, to intimidate me, to silence me, to drive me away, because my very existence as the legal owner of the lake threatened to unravel a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud that would destroy her reputation and possibly send her to prison. If the residents ever found out that they had paid a significant premium for a community asset that was actually private property owned by a man they'd never even met, the lawsuits would be instantaneous, devastating, and completely justified. She needed to either establish some kind of adverse possession claim through long-term use, or simply bully me into selling the land to the HOA for pennies on the dollar out of sheer exhaustion. Because as long as I held that deed and refused to play along with her narrative, she was sitting on a ticking time bomb of litigation that would explode the moment someone decided to verify her claims. I printed out the brochure. The sound of the printer humming like a tank rolling into position, and pinned it to the corkboard on my wall right next to the survey map. 2 documents that told the complete story, one showing the truth, one showing the lie. The sun was beginning to bleed through the blinds, casting long, pale shadows across my study floor, signaling the start of a new day that would be anything but ordinary. I needed to inspect the physical boundaries of my land to see if their encroachment went beyond digital lies and verbal harassment. I grabbed my keys and my phone, made a fresh thermos of coffee, and drove my truck down the dirt track toward the north gate, the remote access point where the county road met my private drive. A spot I rarely checked because it was so far from the house. As I rounded the final bend in the early morning light, I saw the escalation before I even put the truck in park. The old rusted chain that I'd used for more than a decade, the one my father had installed when he first bought this land, was gone, cut clean through with bolt cutters and tossed carelessly into the roadside ditch like garbage. In its place, gleaming new and aggressive in the winter sunlight, was a brand new heavy-duty steel gate painted a sterile industrial black that clashed violently with the natural rust and wood tones of the surrounding forest. Securing it was a shiny, weatherproof padlock that clearly belonged to the HOA, probably keyed to match all their other community locks. But the ultimate insult, the thing that made my blood pressure spike, was the large sign that had been professionally fabricated and bolted to the center of the gate. It gleamed with fresh white paint and authoritative red lettering that read Property of Ridgeview Estates, HOA, Private Access Only. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I stepped out of my truck, the engine ticking as it cooled in the December morning, and walked slowly up to the metal barrier. I ran my hand over the cold steel, feeling the quality of the construction, the permanence of the installation. They hadn't just claimed my water in some abstract legal dispute. They were now physically seizing control of my land, annexing my entrance road to legitimize their sales pitch and establish the community access they'd promised their residents. The audacity was staggering. The boldness of simply installing infrastructure on someone else's property, as if ownership could be established through brass and steel rather than legal title. Diane was doubling down hard, clearly assuming that if she put up enough fences and signs and acted with enough authority, reality itself would eventually bend to her will. She was banking on me being a simple country recluse who would be intimidated by the shiny infrastructure of a wealthy subdivision, who would eventually just give up and move away rather than fight a prolonged legal battle. She thought that by physically locking the gate, by literally preventing me from using my own access road, she was asserting dominance, marking her territory like an alpha predator. I took careful photographs of everything: the new lock, the cut chain lying in the ditch, the sign with its false claims of ownership, making sure the timestamps and GPS coordinates were embedded in each image's metadata. I didn't reach for the bolt cutters that I kept in my truck bed, although the urge to shear that lock off right then and there was visceral and almost overwhelming. But destroying their property, even property illegally installed on my land, would give them exactly the moral high ground they desperately needed. It would let them paint me as the aggressor, the vandal, the dangerous neighbor who destroyed community property. Instead, I needed to let them keep digging this hole deeper and deeper until it was so deep they could never possibly climb out. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind moving through the frozen pine branches, feeling the fundamental shift in the situation. Yesterday morning, I had been a victim of circumstances, a man reacting defensively to chaos that had been thrust upon me. Today, standing at this locked gate on my own property, I was the man holding the map to the minefield they were dancing through, and I knew exactly where every explosive was buried. I got back into my truck, the leather seat cold through my jeans, and connected my phone to the Bluetooth system. I didn't dial the sheriff this time. The police handled criminal trespass. But what I was looking at now, the brochure, the fraudulent premium prices. The illegal gate was a matter of civil warfare that required different weapons. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name of the most aggressive real estate attorney in the Tri-County area. A man who had handled my grandfather's complicated estate settlement years ago when he'd passed. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered, clearly surprised to be getting a call this early. "Marcus, is everything all right? You haven't called me in. What?" 5 years. I put the truck in gear and began the slow drive back toward my house, looking at the fake HOA sign one last time in my rearview mirror. "Morning, Mike," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic and anger I'd felt 24 hours ago. "I need you to clear your entire schedule for the next week, if you can. I was going to ask you to file a simple restraining order for trespassing against my neighbors, but the situation has evolved considerably since then." I paused, letting the weight of what I'd discovered settle between us over the line. I found their original sales prospectus from when the development was first marketed. "Mike, they sold 50 homes by explicitly claiming they owned my ranch, my lake specifically. They charged a $30,000 premium per house based on amenities they had absolutely no legal right to provide." I could hear the sudden silence on the other end of the line as the full implication hit him. The rustling of papers stopping abruptly. "Marcus," he said slowly, his tone sharpening instantly into professional alertness. "If what you're telling me is accurate and you can document it, that's not just a boundary dispute. That's massive real estate fraud. That's potentially criminal charges." I smiled for the first time since the arrest, though was a cold, humorless expression that Diane Sullivan would have been terrified to see if she'd been in the truck with me. "I can document everything. Mike, I've got the federal survey. I've got their marketing materials. I've got the sales records. And I've got photos of them physically seizing my property with locks and gates. They've built an entire financial house of cards on land they don't own. Then here's what we're going to do," Mike said. And I could hear him already pulling up his calendar and making notes. "Don't file for simple trespassing. That's too small. Too easy for them to settle quietly and make go away. Don't give them any advance warning at all." He paused for effect. "Prepare a comprehensive filing for large-scale real estate fraud, fraudulent inducement, and unjust enrichment. We're not just going to sue them for cutting a chain and putting up a gate. We are going to play for the entire pot. Every penny they made off that lie. The battle had begun with a padlock on a gate, but I knew the real war would be won or lost in the murky depths of the lake, in the water that Diane and her board members assumed was theirs to exploit however they wanted." After dispatching my detailed instructions to Mike and emailing him every document I'd found during the night, I didn't waste time cutting through the main gate chain that would come later through proper legal channels. Instead, I navigated my truck down an old overgrown logging trail on the western ridge that I'd nearly forgotten existed. A path so choked with briars and sumac that no luxury SUV from the subdivision could ever hope to traverse without destroying its undercarriage. I met the team I'd hired at the private boat launch on the far side of the ranch, a secluded cove that was completely hidden from the prying eyes of the houses on the hill by a thick stand of old-growth pines. This wasn't a job for amateurs or local handymen who might gossip about it at the hardware store over coffee. I'd contracted a commercial hydrographic survey crew from 3 counties over. Professional men who spent their days mapping bridge pilings for the Department of Transportation and inspecting dam foundations for structural integrity. They arrived in a nondescript white van towing a flat-bottomed aluminum workboat loaded down with sophisticated equipment that probably cost more than the average house in Diane's precious development. I shook hands with the foreman, a weathered man named Ellis, whose skin had been turned to leather by decades of sun and wind, and who asked absolutely no questions about why a private landowner would need a full-size-can sonar sweep of what appeared to be a simple recreational base lake. We launched the boat in silence as the December sun climbed higher, the electric trolling motor humming softly as we glided out toward the center of the water through patches of morning mist that still clung to the surface. My objective was simple but legally critical. I needed to create a comprehensive map of the subsurface topography of my property to prove beyond any shadow of doubt that every cubic foot of water, every ounce of silt, and every fish swimming below belonged exclusively to the deed I held. I sat in the stern of the boat, watching the monitors intently as the sonar transducer began painting an incredibly detailed picture of the world beneath us, a hidden landscape of contour lines and heat maps that stripped away all the romance of the lake and replaced it with cold, hard, irrefutable data. For the first hour, the scan was completely mundane, revealing the familiar underwater geography that I'd known since childhood, when my grandfather had first brought me fishing here, the sharp drop-off near the old willow tree where the channel catfish like to hold, the submerged rock formation where the spawning bass built their beds in spring, and the gentle slope of the sandy bottom near the south shore. But as we carefully maneuvered the boat closer to the northern shoreline, the sector directly beneath the sprawling HOA clubhouse with its Olympic-sized swimming pool and commercial kitchen, the monitor began registering a significant anomaly that made Ellis lean forward with sudden interest. The smooth, natural curve of the lake bed, formed over millennia by erosion and sedimentation, was interrupted by a sharp geometric straight line that extended from the bank out into the deep water. A completely unnatural structure that had absolutely no business existing in this environment. Ellis frowned, tapping the screen with a calloused finger and adjusting the sonar frequency to get better resolution on the object that was disrupting the clean return signal. "You see that, Marcus?" he asked, his voice low and professional. "That's not a sunken log, and it's definitely not a natural rock formation. That's industrial. Looks like concrete or heavy PVC. Maybe 24 inches in diameter, running in a perfectly straight line out from that retention wall they built." My heart went cold. Not the adrenaline-spiked fear of the arrest, but the icy realization of violation, of someone using your property as their personal dumping ground. I ordered Ellis to hold our position, and he immediately signaled to his diver, a younger man who was already suited up in a thick dry suit, to go down and get visual confirmation of what the sonar was detecting. I watched the bubbles break the surface as the diver descended into the murky water, the waiting game stretching minutes into what felt like hours while we sat in silence. My eyes fixed on the imposing structure of the clubhouse looming on the hill above us. A massive building complete with a commercial kitchen, multiple bathrooms, locker rooms for the pool, and facilities designed to serve hundreds of guests. When the diver finally surfaced, breaking through the water with a gasp of air. He didn't give me a thumbs up signal or an okay sign. Instead, he swam directly to the side of our boat, pulling his mask off with an expression of genuine disgust etched across his wet face. "You are really not going to like this," the diver said. wiping dark slime from his forehead. "You've got a pipe down there." "Marcus." "A big one. Looks like a 24-inch culvert pipe coming right out of the hillside." He paused, treading water, and looked back at the murky plume drifting from the pipe opening. "And it's active. There's a steady flow of gray water coming out of it right now. You can see sediment. What looks like grease. Chemical runoff. God knows what else. It's created a dead zone on the bottom about 50 yards wide. No aquatic vegetation. No fish. No crawfish, just sludge and muck." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. Connecting dots I should have seen months ago. The mysterious algae blooms I'd been battling last summer that had turned the water green and foul. The inexplicable fish kills that had left dozens of bass floating belly up for no apparent reason. The strange chemical smell that hung over the water on particularly hot days. A smell I'd attributed to natural decomposition but now realized was something far more sinister. They weren't just claiming my lake through legal gymnastics and false documents. They were actively using it as their personal sewage system. Their toilet. Their dumping ground. We pulled the boat back to the launch, and I sat in the cab of my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the video footage the diver had captured on his waterproof camera. The video was grainy and dark, but it was utterly undeniable. A massive dark mouth of a pipe half buried in accumulated silt, spewing a steady, cloudy plume of effluent directly into my ecosystem, like a industrial drain. This was an illegal discharge pipe, almost certainly installed during the initial construction of the clubhouse to save the developer the massive cost of connecting to the municipal sewer system, which was located miles away on the other side of the ridge. They had simply buried the problem, pointed it downhill toward the stupid local guy in the valley, and assumed that Marcus Clayton would never think to look underwater or would be too ignorant to understand what he was seeing. This was a clear and flagrant violation of the Clean Water Act, a federal felony that carried not just massive fines, but potential prison time for the individuals responsible. But as I watched the gray cloud billow on my screen, I knew with absolute certainty that calling the Environmental Protection Agency immediately would be a strategic mistake. If I called the EPA right now, they would initiate an investigation that could take months or even years to work through their bureaucratic system. They would send letters, schedule hearings, collect samples, and eventually issue fines that the HOA's liability insurance would probably cover. All while Diane spun a narrative that it was an unfortunate accident, a mistake made by a contractor years ago that she knew nothing about. No, I needed something far more immediate, far more visceral. I needed them to feel the consequences of their arrogance and their pollution in a way that a government fine could never accomplish. I paid the survey crew in cash, including a hefty bonus for their discretion and for providing me with all the raw footage on a encrypted drive. And then I made my second strategic phone call of the day. This time, I didn't call a lawyer. I called a man named Miller who ran a specialized foundation repair and underwater construction business in the next town over. Someone who understood the physics of concrete and water pressure better than he understood the nuances of environmental law. Miller met me at the edge of my property 2 hours later, driving a commercial flatbed truck loaded with equipment and materials that looked like they belonged on a battlefield rather than a residential construction site. I showed him the diver's footage and the detailed survey map, pointing to the exact inch where the illegal pipe crossed the invisible line from their property onto mine. This pipe is trespassing on my land. I told him, keeping my voice flat and professional. It's actively discharging hazardous waste onto my property without my permission, under property law. I have the absolute right to abate a nuisance that's causing damage to my land. Correct, Miller? A man of very few words, who understood the physics of hydraulics and concrete far better than he understood legal theory. Just nodded once while chewing on a toothpick. If it's on your side of the surveyed boundary line, you can build whatever you want there. Marcus, it's your land. You want me to remove it? Cut it out? No? I said, and I felt a cold smile touching the corners of my lips for the first time that day. I don't want to remove it. Removing it would give them a chance to quietly fix the problem, to reroute the pipe properly, to make this go away without anyone really noticing. I paused, making sure he understood exactly what I was asking for. I want to plug it. I want you to seal it so completely, so permanently, that not even a single drop of water can get through that pipe ever again. I explained the technical specifications in detail. I wanted a high-grade hydraulic cement plug, reinforced with steel rebar, injected directly into the mouth of the pipe on my side of the boundary line, where I had every legal right to work. It had to be quick-setting, capable of curing underwater, and strong enough to withstand the immense back pressure that would build up when they kept trying to push thousands of gallons down a pipe that no longer had an exit. Miller looked at the video again, mentally calculating the volume and the flow rate, and then looked up at the clubhouse sitting on the hill like a castle. If we plug this and they keep pushing water down it like they have been, that water has got to go somewhere. He warned me, a glint of understanding appearing in his eyes. Pressure builds up behind a blockage. Physics always wins that fight, eventually. That's exactly what I'm counting on. I replied, we waited until the sun began dipping below the ridge, casting the entire valley into long protective shadows that would hide our operation from any casual observer who might be looking down from the expensive houses on the hill. We took Miller's specialized work skiff out onto the lake, the boat loaded down with heavy bags of rapid-set hydraulic cement and a pneumatic injection system that looked like it belonged in a deep-sea oil rig. The operation was surgical and completely silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic police raid Diane had orchestrated the morning before. There were no sirens wailing, no shouting, no threats, just the quiet splash of the diver entering the water and the low, steady thrum of the air compressor running. I watched the stream of bubbles rise to the surface as Miller's team worked 60 feet below us in the dark water, methodically inserting an inflatable bladder into the pipe opening to temporarily stop the flow of sewage, then carefully packing the void behind it with a dense, fast-curing concrete mixture that would set as hard as granite. The process took nearly 3 hours of grueling underwater labor, with the diver making multiple trips up and down to refill his air tanks. I monitored the sonar display, ensuring that every single movement, every action we took, remained strictly on my side of the coordinates defined by the federal survey that was now filed with my attorney. We weren't touching their land. We weren't damaging their property. We were simply exercising my absolute right to fortify my own property, to build a structure within the subterranean boundaries of my ranch. As the last bag of cement was carefully mixed and injected, the diver surfaced one final time and gave me the OK sign. His hand forming a circle against the darkening sky. The plug was set. It was a solid 3-foot thick cork of reinforced concrete, capable of holding back the pressure of a fire hose indefinitely. The pipe that had been slowly poisoning my lake for 5 years was now effectively a dead end, a loaded gun with the barrel welded completely shut, pointing directly back at the person who'd been pulling the trigger. We packed up all the gear under the cover of twilight, the water returning to its glassy stillness as if nothing at all had happened below its surface. The dead zone at the bottom was still there, a scar that would take years to heal, but the source of the poison had been permanently strangled. I stood on my dock, the same dock where I'd been handcuffed and humiliated just hours before, and looked up at the clubhouse on the hill. I could see lights turning on in the commercial kitchen as staff arrived to prep for whatever weekend events they had planned. Completely oblivious to what had just occurred, I could imagine the industrial dishwashers that would soon be running at full capacity, the showers in the locker rooms being used by people after their swim, the toilets being flushed dozens of times by residents who believed they were living in a pristine, exclusive paradise where everything worked perfectly because they paid their HOA dues. They had absolutely no idea that the infrastructure they relied on completely had just been fundamentally and permanently altered. I paid Miller and his crew, shaking each of their hands with genuine gratitude for a job done quickly and professionally. They drove off into the gathering darkness, leaving me alone with the crickets beginning their evening song and the first stars appearing overhead. I walked slowly back to my truck, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction that was far more potent and satisfying than the helpless anger I'd felt that morning. I wasn't just a victim defending himself anymore, reacting to attacks and hoping the system would eventually work. I was the architect of their education, the engineer of their consequences. I'd given them every reasonable opportunity to be decent neighbors, to respect clearly marked boundaries, to verify their own outrageous claims before declaring war on someone who'd done nothing wrong. Instead, they had chosen to bully, to lie, to trespass, to pollute, and to abuse the legal system. Now, the immutable laws of physics would teach them the lesson that the laws of men had so far failed to convey. I took one last long look at the glowing windows of the clubhouse on the hill, shining like a beacon of arrogance and entitlement in the darkness. They thought they could dump their refuse on the little guy living in the valley below them and that it would just disappear, flow away, become someone else's problem downstream. I started my truck and drove slowly back to my house, the silence of the night feeling heavy with anticipation, charged with potential energy. The pipe was sealed. The pressure was building behind it. With every gallon of water they flushed, it was only a matter of time, probably hours. Not days before the system reached critical mass. They liked dumping their trash in my yard. Now let's see what they do when all that trash comes flooding back into theirs. Saturday arrived with a brilliant cloudless sky that seemed almost offensive in its perfection, the kind of pristine weather that real estate agents literally pray for when showing expensive properties. The summer solstice gala at the Ridgeview Estates Clubhouse was in full swing by noon, and from my carefully chosen vantage point on the ridge about 300 yards away, concealed behind a dense thicket of oak trees, I could see the elaborate white marquee tents that had been erected on the pristine lawn. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars, observing the gathering of roughly 200 residents who were currently enjoying all the amenities that my illegally polluted land had been providing for the past 5 years. Criminal trespass, criminal mischief. And they mentioned something about filing a false police report. Apparently, this wasn't her first time calling in fake complaints about you. No, I confirmed. It wasn't. Marcus. I owe you an apology, Tom said quietly. A lot of us do. We believed her when she said the lake was community property. We believed the marketing materials when we bought our houses. We never thought to verify. We just trusted that the HOA was telling the truth. I understand. I said, and I meant it. That's what con artists count on good people, assuming everyone else is honest. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said. Now the truth comes out. All of it. The legal tsunami that followed was everything my attorney Mike had predicted, and more. Within a week of Diane's arrest, the Ridgeview Estates community erupted into total chaos as residents began comparing notes, reviewing their own purchase documents, and realizing the scope of the fraud they'd been victims of. The class action lawsuit was filed by 48 homeowners, represented by a firm from the city that specialized in consumer fraud cases. They sued Diane Sullivan personally, the HOA board, and the original development company for fraudulent inducement, breach of fiduciary duty, and misrepresentation. The numbers, when Mike finally showed them to me in his office, were staggering. First, he said, sliding the summary sheet across his polished desk, there's the restitution for diminished property value. Independent appraisers determined that without the lake access they paid for, each home dropped approximately $20,000 in value. He did the math on his calculator. 20,000 times 50 homes equals $1 million in damages. Second, there's the EPA settlement. The Environmental Protection Agency doesn't mess around with Clean Water Act violations. Between the fines for the illegal discharge, the cost of the emergency environmental assessment, and the mandated removal of the pipe infrastructure, that's another $150,000. And third, Mike said with a slight smile, there's your personal settlement. $50,000 for the false arrest, the harassment, the trespassing, the attempted seizure of your property, and emotional distress. The HOA's insurance denied coverage due to the criminal nature of Diane's actions. So, this all comes directly from their assets. He leaned back in his chair. Total liability, $1.2 million. Can they pay it? I asked. Mike shook his head slowly. The HOA has maybe $200,000 in reserves. For the rest, they'll have to do a special assessment divide the cost among all the homeowners. Every household will get a bill for roughly $24,000 to cover the judgment. The irony was brutal. The residents sued the HOA to get their money back, only to realize they were the HOA, and they'd have to tax themselves to pay themselves back. But the lawyers had been clever. They'd pierced the corporate veil, arguing that Diane had acted beyond her authority and with criminal intent. The judge agreed. The $1 million in fraud damages would be Diane's personal responsibility. The foreclosure notice arrived at Diane's house exactly 2 weeks after the judgment was entered. I didn't attend the auction, but I heard about it from multiple sources. The house sold for $450,000, less than half its supposed value, once the truth about the lake access came out. But there was one item at that auction I did want. Her custom golf cart, pink fiberglass and chrome, with gold letters reading Madame President on the hood. When the bidding opened, I was the only person who raised my hand. $100. I said clearly. The auctioneer looked around. No one else bid. The neighbors let the silence speak for them. Sold for $100? I drove that ridiculous pink cart out of the subdivision slowly, past the ruins of Diane's empire, past the neighbors who now understood what had really happened. As I passed Diane, standing on the curb with a single suitcase, I didn't gloat or laugh. I simply raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a polite wave. She didn't wave back. She just stood there, trembling, as I drove her symbol of authority out of her life forever. 1 year later, I stood on my dock at dawn, watching mist rise off the water. The new HOA board had apologized formally. They'd paid every penny of the settlement. They'd had the illegal pipe properly capped and the drainage rerouted to the city sewer at enormous expense. The lake was healing. The water was clear again. The fish had returned. I cast my line out, feeling the familiar weight of the rod in my hands. 20 minutes later, I felt that distinctive thump, the strike of a big bass. I worked it carefully to the boat, and when I finally held it up, I smiled. 8 pounds. Maybe 9. A survivor. A fighter. I lowered it gently back into the water and watched it swim away. I didn't need a trophy to prove anything. Up on the ridge, the new HOA president, Tom Bradley, waved as he walked his dog past my fence. I waved back. Balance restored. Boundaries respected. Peace returned. The lake was mine. Legally and undeniably. And Diane Sullivan was gone. Her pink golf cart parked in my barn as a permanent reminder that arrogance always has a price. $1.2 million, to be exact.